Maulana Isaaq Fonseca, who is the missionary of Montreal, to come and deliver his address on Hazrat Umar, the Calliphate, and the establishment of a peaceful and just society.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Respected Amir Sahib, distinguished guests, friends of the community, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. In these days, it is becoming more and more unpopular to hold positive opinions about Islam. In the media, little light is rarely shed on it, while colossal amounts of coverage are given preference towards showing the turmoil in the Muslim world and various political Islamic figures and groups who are spreading bloodshed and chaos in society. The staunch critics of Islam will stifle any real discussion about Islam and the true causes of Muslim extremism, and will allow public opinion to hold only one narrative, which is that modernity and social values of freedom and liberty are not compatible with Islamic values and Islamic leadership. Even public officials such as Dr. Ben Carson, the cabinet member of the new US administration, are reinforcing the concept that Islam is inherently oppressive and violent. Therefore, in view of the flood of negative coverage and prejudiced opinions on Islam, I will endeavor in my presentation to answer the central question to this whole discussion, which is, can true Islamic values and leadership play any part in establishing peace and justice in the global society, or are they a source of spreading violence and suppression? The answer to that question is the same as the topic of my speech, which is the Islamic leadership of Hazrat Umar, Razila Ta'ala Anhu's Caliphate, and how he established a peaceful and equitable society. I will thus demonstrate how this one example of Islamic leadership can be a source of guidance for the creation of peace and justice in the world. Hazrat Umar Razila Ta'ala Anhu was the second caliph or successor of the founder of Islam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Just before the death of his predecessor, the first caliph, Hazrat Abu Bakr Razila Ta'ala Anhu, consulted prominent Muslims for his successor, and they agreed upon Hazrat Umar. What greater tribute to his character could there be than when Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if there would have been any prophet after me, it would have been Umar bin al-Khattab. He was an influential and educated man who loved most truth and honesty. Before really knowing Islam and thinking that it was a danger to society and swayed by the criticism against Islam, he thought it best that he would himself finish Islam by murdering its founder. But yet, upon learning the reality and beauty of Islam, he quickly became the utmost devoted follower of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His acts of justice were absolute, and acts of kindness graced all for whom he encountered. He was a strong, brave, and decisive leader with a sweet and tender heart. Despite being a caliph in charge of vast amounts of wealth, he had little personal belongings and could always be seen wearing worn-out clothes with many patches. He also forbade his government officials from wearing expensive clothes that the public could relate to them. To the Muslims and the non-Muslims of his state, he was their great benefactor. They all deeply loved and respected him for his treatment of equality. Hazrat Umar Razila Ta'ala Anhu took such meticulous care of the needs of his people, that he would routinely go in the state at night in disguise to determine their needs. And on one occasion, he found a woman with starving children, and he straight away brought food for them and started the fire for cooking the meal. The woman, not knowing it was the Khalifa, thanked him and said that you should have been the Khalifa instead of Umar. The next two incidences confirm his level of justice and equality towards the non-Muslim public. He would periodically advise his governors to take special care of the non-Muslims and would also himself regularly inquire of them if they had any difficulty. Once a delegation of Muslims came to Hazrat Umar, and the first question he put to them was whether they had any inconvenience from the Muslims. They replied that they had received nothing but the best of fidelity and treatment from the Muslims. He was so deeply concerned for the rights of the non-Muslims who would live after his death that he made an oath to the Muslim Caliph after him to follow. And he said, I advise the Khalifa to follow me, to have a most gentle and compassionate way with the non-Muslim subjects of the Islamic government, to fulfill their pacts, to protect them and to fight their enemies for them, and never to put a burden or responsibility on them which is beyond their capacity. Now, what room is there for a radical political leader, who is a Muslim radical leader today, who can go around suppressing the non-Muslim subjects of his state? There's none at all. The few instances of Hazrat Umar's acts of beneficence and equity demonstrate the cornerstone of the Islamic society. He was emulating the directives of the Holy Quran and the countless acts of benevolence and justice showed to Muslims and non-Muslims alike by his master, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Holy Quran gives these directives. Inna Allaha ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'idhukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. That is, verily Allah enjoins justice and the doing of good to others and giving like kindred, and forbids indecency and manifest evil and wrongful transgression. He admonished you that you may take heed. The basis of an Islamic society is to do justice to all, perform goodness to others as you would do amongst your family. It does not specify that you must perform only these acts of justice and kindness to Muslims alone, but that you should treat all like your family. These are the measures to instill peace and equity in the society and help to prevent the seeds of chaos and transgression from growing. In chapter 5, verses 9 of the Holy Quran, Allah gives the highest form of justice to act upon, which is to show justice even to your adversaries. Holding fast to this principle, during his caliphate, Hazrat Umar went so far as to declare that if a Muslim defrauds any enemy or breaks any treaty, then he is liable to be executed. Now, these measures were in place to protect the security of the state. If today Muslim or non-Muslim countries in conflicts take care of this golden principle, then it would help ensure conflicts from further escalating. Social welfare for all, as taught by Islam and nurtured by its leadership, developed in leaps and bounds under the care of Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu. The basic needs are outlined in the Holy Quran for all to have food, water, clothes, and shelter. It reads, Inna laka alla tajua fiha wa la ta'ra wa annaka la tadhma'u fiha wa la tadha. It is provided for thee that thou wilt not hunger therein, nor wilt thou be naked, and that thou wilt not thirst therein, nor wilt thou be exposed to the sun. Following are some of the salient features of Hazrat Umar's social welfare system. A first ever census was taken to record everyone's needs and allowances. Record keeping of taxes of wealth was instituted so that the large sums of money from the treasury could be properly distributed. Child benefits were handed out and increased as the child's age increased. Orphans were taken care of by the state and fixed general allowances given to the weak and disabled. Once Hazrat Umar was informed that some families don't use their child benefits for food, but saved it or used it uselessly. And to this he replied, Allah will help them, give them their right. I prefer to give rather than to take away something. There was also old age pension allotted to Muslims as well as non-Muslims. When Hira was conquered, Hazrat Umar Radhiyallahu anhu agreed to give pension to all non-Muslims who would be out of a job because of their old age. Once he saw an old Jewish man who was begging, and he told Hazrat Umar the reason was because he did not have the funds to pay the tax for the non-Muslim security, which was known as jizya. Hazrat Umar must have been, so taken by this that he said that what a grave injustice is it that jizya is being levied upon such people. We have been ordered, he says, we have been ordered to help the poor, not to burden them with tax. And thereafter, he compassionately gave him pension from the state treasury, and as well, the Jewish man no longer had to pay the jizya. Hazrat Umar never compelled anyone to pay jizya if they didn't have the capacity, and always preferred to lighten the burden of others. Some other things provided by the Social Security were food, apparel, shelter, necessary medical care, education, and matrimonial aid. In this day and age where violence and terrorism is on the rise, if a society can provide for the basic needs of the poor and the helpless who sometimes go after terrorism to get the financial aid, if they're able to make them independent, then they will not be persuaded to become indifferent towards the government or persuaded by the money and lure into becoming a terrorist. Hazrat Umar Radhiyallahu anhu is recognized for highly developing the economic infrastructure of his state and brilliantly running the public administration. He set up a committee for consultation on important matters known as Majlis Shura. Consultation was initiated by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and was a Quranic teaching. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ fil amr. O Prophet, consult the people in matters of administration. Hazrat Umar would say, no Islamic government can be accepted as being lawful without a system of consultation. Some of his most notable achievements are setting up public treasury, creating provinces, and appointing governors known as emirs, establishing such government departments as the police, tax and revenue, mail and justice. He put courts of justice in every town and selected righteous people for judges and paid the judges and government officials well so that they could not be bribed. And he took all measures to do away with misappropriation of funds and didn't allow his officials to terrorize the people. On one such occasion, a poor man was hit by the son of an official. This official was so scared that he put this poor man in jail to hide him from Hazrat Umar. When this man was released, he somehow went to the Khalifa and told him, Hazrat Umar said, you have permission to slap that son of the official and as well as the official. He took the permission and he slapped the son and consequently injured him. But he didn't go so far as to take it to the son's father. But he said, after that, I have found justice and I am fully satisfied. There were also the construction of new cities and development of infrastructure such as building of mosques, schools, roads, and bridges. and along the highways were constructed inns for travelers. Transportation between cities was provided, and major roads at night were lit. There were also guest houses in most cities with free meals for visitors who came from long distances. On creating the police force, he made posts for them, and he also made a regular army with salaries. The Islamic calendar known as Hijri calendar was introduced. Sweet drinking water was provided through a complex system of canals. The canals were also made for irrigation and agricultural development. It is recorded that during a severe famine, Hazrat Umar Anhu did not take any taxes from the people. Providing clean drinking water to each and everyone, even despite differences, was a basic human right afforded by Islam, and something Prophet Muhammad ﷺ exemplified when even during battle, he let his enemies drink from their wells. Once when Hazrat Umar Anhu learnt from a caravan that their thirsty people and animals were refused water from the locals of his state, he said to the caravan that, "Why did not you attack these people?" This meant that it was a life and death situation. This was the actual case when on another occasion a man died from thirst because again he was refused water from the locals. And Hazrat Umar Anhu decreed that the payment of blood money be given to the dead man's family. This is a great lesson for the world today, as water is one source of strife and conflict in the world. The advanced nations generally provide drinking water to their people, but seek to profit on the ever increasingly limited supply of water in other underdeveloped countries. The greatest values of modern Western societies are freedom of conscience afforded to all citizens, regardless of caste or creed, and as well the Machiavellian ideal that citizens should not be coerced into following the dictates of the state, but should be left to adopt the laws naturally, willingly. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has been unfairly accused of spreading his faith by the sword and forcing people into believing, whereas in reality it was the Muslims who were being mercilessly persecuted and sometimes even killed in order to instill fear in others so that they abandon their new faith. The right for all to have freedom of conscience, to believe as one may like, is enshrined in the Holy Quran, in which verse says, "La ikraha fid din." There should be no compulsion in religion. And the physical security for protection of faith and ideals is guaranteed to all in the Holy Quran, chapter 22, verses 40 to 41. That is, that Allah granted permission to the Muslims to defend themselves through jihad or religious defensive wars in order to protect the religious rights and places of worship for all who were being persecuted. When Prophet Muhammad ﷺ formed his state in Medina, he granted the same protections and religious freedom to Jews and others as was given to Muslims. During Hazrat Umar's Caliphate, the defensive religious wars were being fought against the Roman and Persian empires. When his armies defeated these empires, they subsequently inherited their vast lands. But Hazrat Umar Anhu, unlike the leaders of the empires of the day, always granted religious freedom and protection of life and equal rights to the new subjects, and he never destroyed their property or their places of worship. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih IV, may Allah have him, history stands as a witness that even during the period when the Muslims were at the zenith of their power, the Jews were never maltreated. Muslims twice occupied Palestine. They proclaimed a general amnesty regarding liberty, life, and property, and did not persecute any Jew or Christian. The first occupation of Palestine was during the Caliphate of Hazrat Umar Anhu, while Sultan Salahuddin occupied Palestine for the second time. The historians agree that with these two exceptions of Muslim occupation of Palestine, There was never a time when Palestine was occupied by any alien army which did not conduct a massacre. For instance, when Richard the Lion-Hearted, who was a British king, occupied a part of Palestine, he carried out a genocide of all Jewish men, women, as well as Muslim. The previous Roman rulers of Palestine in medieval Christianity have much in common with today's ISIS or radical clerics, such as the Saudi Grand Mufti, who called for the destruction of all churches in Arabian Peninsula, or the Pakistani Maulana Maududi, who preached for death of all apostates, which is in complete contradiction to the verse of the Holy Quran, which I just earlier recited, which says there should be no compulsion in religion. Commenting on Maududi's ideas of apostasy, Hazrat Caliphatul Masih IV said, though originating from interpretive errors of early Muslim jurisprudence, are in fact based on medieval Christianity. He also explained that the Orientalists, who are the worst in their criticism of Islam, don't ascribe this dogma to Islam, but only to Christianity. The Roman empires of Constantine persecuted the Jews, stripped them of their rights, and burnt their synagogues and towns, and barred Jews from relocating back to Palestine from foreign lands. But Hazrat Umar Ta'ala Anhu changed all that, granting Jews and Christians alike religious freedoms, rights, and security. Even though the two empires of Rome and Persia were incited by a group of Jews from Khaybar to fight the Muslims, Hazrat Umar did not unfairly blacklist all of the Jews as enemies or potential suspects of the state. In fact, he gave them protection and allowed them to relocate in Palestine. This was in fact the time when their chance to actually come back, the indigenous people were allowed to come back to the land, which now we see in this modern era, they have come back. But this started from his time. And he also gave them military service and allowed them to hold such offices as intelligence agents. And as many instances show that any Jew who had been unfairly treated could find justice during his rule. When they occupied foreign lands, Hazrat Umar Ta'ala Anhu did not take over all the property of the people, but just charged them a land tax. And Muslims were not allowed to purchase land in these countries. Many conflicts in the world are due to nations wishing to acquire the resources of other countries. Unnecessary bloodshed could be avoided in the world if this principle was followed of Hazrat Umar Ta'ala Anhu, which was not to look greedily on the wealth of others by acquiring their resources. This principle is outlined in chapter 15, verses 89 of the Holy Quran, for helping to establish peace between nations. Another instance reveals that Hazrat Umar Ta'ala Anhu's state was not in the business of amassing wealth from other nations, was when his Emir of Syria, Hazrat Abu Ubaidah Ta'ala Anhu, could not protect the Christians. He returned the tax for protection, and the Christians were so taken that they prayed for them and said, "May God grant you victory over the Romans so that you may return to rule this land." What example is there in the world where a country coming in and dominating that country, and then the people of that country, they praise them, and if they for some reason are pulled out, and they were praising them and asking them and praying for them to come back? This example is only because of justice and equality to the people. This is only that, in following the teachings of the Holy Quran and trying to establish goodness in the world as directed by Allah. Education was an extremely important part of Islamic teachings that after the battles, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ allowed freedom to prisoners of war, to those who could teach a Muslim to read. Hazrat Umar carried on this tradition of learning in the Caliphate by educating the public in schools on the Holy Quran, Hadith, and other subjects. He made it mandatory for his soldiers to know the Holy Quran and study it well. In his army, it is recorded that there were 300 soldiers who memorized the entire Quran. Hazrat Umar didn't want his soldiers to become prone to the material things of the wealthy people they encountered in the Roman and Persian empires. Thus, he made it mandatory that they camp outside the city centers, away from their allure, and even built entire cities for his armies. Only full-time soldiers were paid a salary, but there were others serving as volunteers. Those who were not full-time, they came as volunteers, and they did not come for wealth or for money. They went there without, on their own backs with their own money. All soldiers were directed to adhere to Islamic principles of tolerance, justice, and kindness when dealing with the people they encountered, which yielded great respect and praise and their friendship. They would have all known the etiquettes regarding war as based in the Holy Quran and Hadith, that they are not to kill anyone unjustly, not to kill any non-combatant in any circumstances, neither harm any women, children, elderly person, a monk, and not even harm animals or trees. Now contrast this to today, the soldiers of ISIS, the senseless killing, rape, and maiming of people who are encountered by these radical terrorists, who come only by the allure of money so that they can somehow fulfill their anger and their hatreds by killing people. IS, or the Islamic State, has tried to establish a so-called caliphate, but it doesn't resemble the true Islamic caliphate in any way. Rather, it seems a mere resemblance of the savage King Richard the Lion-Hearted. Knowledge, or any knowledge at all, of the Holy Quran and Islam is definitely one thing greatly lacking in these young terrorists who are recruited from the West. This is corroborated by their lawyers, namely Mr. Sven Mary, and by a study conducted by the Royal Institute for International Relations, published in March of last year. In the Washington Post, the Belgian counterterrorism official Alan Gringard said that many are essentially part of street gangs. What the Islamic State brought in its wake was a new strain of Islam which legalized their radical approach. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih IV fittingly diagnosed the phenomenon of this violent terrorism among the Muslim nations by saying, "I am fully convinced that almost every form of communal violence witnessed in the world today, wherever that is and whatever cloak it wears, is essentially political in nature. Religion is not the exploiter. It is itself exploited by internal or external political interests. When we examine so-called Islamic terrorism, we discover political forces working behind an Islamic facade. More often than not, the real manipulators and exploiters are not even Muslims themselves. One example of many Muslim countries exploiting Islam for selfish political interests over its people's interests is Libya. Diederik van der Wel, a professor and political scientist at Dartmouth University, believed that the Libyan leader, Muammar Gaddafi, sponsored and used terrorism as a means to rise as a leader in the Arab world. In 2003, the Libyan government accepted responsibility for the terrorist bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988, which killed 189 US citizens and was the second largest terrorist attack on America after 9/11. The security of Muammar Gaddafi's people suffered for his political ambitions when the oil-grabbing intervention of NATO overthrew the leader, made Libya a stronghold and training ground for ISIS, with divided, violent, sectarian chaos. This selfish intervention also put European people in threat as the ISIS base of the ISIS base because of its closest proximity to Europe. In closing, if both Muslim and non-Muslim countries would follow the selfless examples which I have briefly highlighted in my discourse of Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu, for granting the rights and securities of all citizens of the world first, before personal, political, or national interests, then and only then can we say that the establishment of peace has started in the global society. Jazakumullah, thank you.
Nare Takbir! Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa! Islam! Khilafat! Nare